It's updated. I emailed it to you, but it's
Yeah,
the
this
same
is
one
the
that I
same
emailed to
thing.
you.
Yep.
So thanks for coming out. For a lot of people, it's February break. And then for half of us, it's not February break. It's just a cold Tuesday. So I met maybe a week ago, a little more than a week ago, with Paul and Bill and Steve and Doug. And what we're proposing, and tonight's really just a check-in on process, is that we change our topics slightly and change our end date slightly. And for those of you who are all set and getting done in March, I'm sorry about that. So if you turn to the second page, so today we're in meeting 6 and it's listed as process. And then we'll spend a little time clarifying new renovation add and renovation, but really what I wanted to talk about were the next several meetings. The meeting on the 5th of March, Sharon's gonna come and do a big chunk on financing and potential incentives around this. And I'm also trying to get John Winokur up to come because he has contacts and he's done a bunch of MSBA projects. Sharon's our business administrator, Sharon Harrison. And then John Winokur worked for,
I met him in the summertime.
yeah, I think most of you met him in the summertime. I forget what his company used to be called, but now he's part of
Strategic Building
Yes,
Systems.
Strategic Building Systems, but now he's part of a bigger group called Colliers.
Right.
So I'll try to get him to that meeting. After that, I think that'll give us a context to start formally making a recommendation. And we talked about using meetings 8 and 9 to structure those recommendations, to sort of go through point by point what we value, what we care about. And the finance piece is really gonna drive some decisions. Probably all of you have been reading what's going on up a little north of us in Dalton at Wacona, right? And it's sort of fascinating because maybe they're a year ahead of us or 18 months ahead of us and what they're wrestling with, right? So they wanted to do something. I think they had aspirations of geothermal, and then they backed away from that, and then they thought about some other things, and then they backed away from that, and now there's sort of the regular back and forth. How can our community afford this? And then people coming out, how can we not afford it? And what does it mean to be on a fixed income and try to afford it? And what does it mean in other contexts? So I think it's just fascinating to watch that because it may reflect some of what we're gonna go through. But we thought we'd spend 2 meetings structuring a recommendation, and we'll bring to those, or maybe in advance of those, some specific things that mirror the MSBA process. But I think the financing and incentives talk will help us frame that. Then, and he's here, and I'm psyched that he's here, Josh Shapiro has offered to help us try to organize our thoughts into some sort of cool presentation. For those of you who don't know Joshua, he finished up at Monument when he was a student, then did his undergraduate work at NYU. They did a big project at NYU last year that was covered. Maybe Terry, you covered it? I don't know who covered it, or
Not sure.
I think
maybe
Heather
did?
Yeah.
And sort of re-envisioning the high school, and they had no limits to it, and the plan ended up, it was really cool, but it ended up looking like the Apple headquarters, like a big glass dome, and it gave the custodians a heart attack because they'd have to clean the glass. But it provoked some good conversations. So we're thinking that after the meetings on the 8th and 9th meeting, the meeting on March 21st and on April 9th, we'll have enough raw information that some combination of Steve and I and Paul and Bill can feed a bunch of stuff to Joshua, and he can try to put that in a presentation. And we talked about, we don't know what form it would take. If I did it, it would obviously be PowerPoint, which is sort of old school and terrible, and he's gonna use some cool new technology that I don't know of, like Prezi or something even neater, so be more dynamic and video based, and hopefully summarize the depth of the work we've done. And then we thought we'd use the meeting on the 23rd for him to do a dry run-through, or maybe with several of us involved in it, of a presentation. And then that'll be like our dress rehearsal, right? So we'll get as much information to him as we can, we'll put it together in some form, he'll present it, and maybe some of us will present it to ourselves as if we were the school committee. And then we'll find some parts that are great and some parts that are not so great, and we'll revise it. And then a little more than a week later, we'll present it again to the school committee. And at that point then, I think the work of this group will largely be done. Simultaneously, we'll submit an updated, presumably, statement of interest to the state, and we'll see what happens. And then from a timeline perspective, I imagine around December of this year, then the state would formally respond to us and make a decision, sort of like they did this past year. I also think that it's highly likely, because they shared this in a phone call, that if we submit another SOI, that they'll come in a formal way and visit the school. And if that happens, then we might bring this group together, assuming people are around, and who knows when it'll be, to meet with the people from the state to give them an update on what we've been doing. And then in terms of our submission to them, I'll share what we've done to date, and then after we do the presentation and it's finalized, we'll share that as a addenda to the application. So that's a timeline. Does that work for people?
So when is the cutoff for the new SOI?
I'll look again. It's April
12th.
April 12th?
Yep.
You just looked at it?
That's the letter.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would actually come before you finish the presentation.
It will, but as I mentioned before, it's simply a placeholder.
Yep.
And it's very much a objective, low inference document.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty much like we're gonna submit what we submitted last time. I think the only thing that'll be different there'll be a more sophisticated cover letter talking about what we've done since the last time, both in terms of physical updates and repairs, and in terms of what's planned or potentially in the budget, and then what this group has done in terms of meeting. The other thing that I think makes this additionally attractive is all the work that particularly, many people in the building, but particularly Sean Flynn has done around CBTE and the two big grants in those areas, and how that might have implications for modified or different space. And I forget the guy's name, but the
David, isn't it? Dave?
Yeah, Edmonds.
Edmonds. Yeah.
Dave Edmonds came, which is funny, right? Because there's Dave Edmonds as a singer too, but
He's a retired OSHA guy, right?
he is a retired OSHA guy.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with him.
It's a small world. We were talking about OSHA before. But one of his things was, from a state perspective, having that be part of a project is very interesting and appealing to them. And then separately, and Doug and I were talking about this, and we're about to share it with faculty, the Commissioner Riley, the Commissioner of the Department of Elementary Secondary Ed, is coming to do a visit on March 4th. And that may or may not be connected. I sort of think everything's connected, and a couple times a year he comes out to Western Mass, or really far Western Mass, and that's going on too. So he's only here for a little more than an hour, but we'll try to bend his ear on that, and continue to reach out to Smitty and Adam and other folks. So that's sort of a timeline. What we can do, first, if people have questions, we can respond to those, and then I think we could dig down a little bit.
The presentation to the school committee,
Yeah.
is there an expected outcome? And does that kick off another process, or what is the purpose of it?
Well, I mean, our initial charge, and Steve's sitting right behind you, he's the chair, so he can talk to it too, but was to make a recommendation to the school committee.
Right.
Right, so we could end up, and I've thought a lot about this and talked to folks about it. I think it probably doesn't make sense to just say one thing, but it probably makes more sense to say, here are a range of options in the order of priority that we think makes the most sense, and here's some advantages and disadvantages to each, and share that with the school committee, because if we just said, do a new building or renovate this building, and then we start up a formal MSBA process and we get numbers that are slightly different than ours or something, I'd like to afford that group a little bit of flexibility. But I think if we have no recommendation, then people on the committee will feel cheated, and people will think our process was not good.
We also have to talk about community buy-in. So whatever your recommendations are, at some point, I would imagine, we haven't talked to the school committee, we would have community forums to make sure that people are buying into, that you're not way off base, the school committee's not way off base, and we start off on the wrong step.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, that's a good one. I'm gonna take some notes as people talk.
How do the rest of you feel about what's been presented?
Makes sense. Seems logical.
Well, the reason I asked the question about what's the purpose of the presentation to the school committee, there's no shortage of people on the school committee sitting right here in this room, right? So I'm just wondering how much new information, or are you just now cluing in the people who don't have to be part of this?
Well, I mean, I think both, right? One of the neat things about the school committee is it's on TV. So by doing the presentation to the school committee, and I wish I could figure out how many people watch it. I know there are a handful of dedicated viewers, but I don't have a sense of like Nielsen ratings on it. But I think, right, I mean, it may be,
Probably don't
it
want
may
a
be
sense of that.
27 people, and Eileen's one of them, or it could be potentially several hundred people. I don't know, but I think that's part of it is, it's a public thing, and even though there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 school committee members here right now, and 2 selectmen, and I don't think I'm missing anybody else, right? That's a lot of people.
Mhm.
I think there's still people there who sort of have a general sense of what we're doing, but don't get the details of what
Yeah,
we're doing.
don't discount the other 5 members of the school committee who need to be brought into this and sold this, so I think that's important.
Oh,
Yeah.
I gathered that,
Because I mean, I don't talk to any of them about this. I mean, I'll give them
Right.
general overviews, but there's no kind of update to them. They're gonna
Okay.
basically hear it all new the same time that everyone else is, as far as I know,
I would
so.
think it's a good opportunity also to invite people, to really try to get people to the school committee so that more people are in the loop.
For the meeting, for the last one, Rebecca?
For the presentation.
For the presentation,
Yeah.
good idea.
I
We
think
could
it's a
advertise it.
great-
Yeah.
Yeah, a great
I think we have Terry and Eileen here.
And it's another time to invite town officials.
Yes.
We're not very successful in getting there
Yeah,
all the
that's-
time, but
yeah.
again, it's a good chance to have them come and be brought up to date of what's going on.
Right.
And then potentially after that presentation, right, so we'll do a draft to this group and then we'll present it to the school committee. Maybe after that, then we take some additional feedback, and particularly if there are lots of people in the audience, and then have an even better presentation and run around and do that. It's just a heads up about where we are. Right, so I mean, the Rotary Club's an interesting place because there's the core group of people there, and simultaneously they're always short on speakers, and I think it would be an interesting topic for them, and they're probably another half dozen type things like that.
And there's also WSBS. You did the interview for the Hall of Fame. We could go on that.
Yeah.
And use that forum.
For a little bit more than 10 minutes.
10 minutes, right. Well, we could get a program.
Would it make sense to present to the select boards individually as well?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and then maybe, and we'll have a better sense of this as the presentation comes together. But maybe there's the budget book, we've got the big budget book, and then we have the thin budget book. Maybe we have the big presentation and we have the short presentation.
I mean, is there the possibility too of after the meeting at the second, the presentation, that if we get enough ideas from the school committee and people in the audience, that we might wanna have another meeting after that to kinda maybe tweak the presentation a little bit?
I think so.
Yeah. How do you feel, let's throw this out, how do you feel about not, I'm kinda, when Peter and Steve and Doug and myself and Paul met, we kinda hashed this around a little, that I really feel we should have some consensus on at least one recommendation. I understand where Peter's going with the new renovation ad, that we look at those three, but I really feel that we should say, you know, this is what we want, we recommend this in a more, I don't know, I guess my nature is being more definitive, that, you know, they can disagree with us, but this is where we wanna go. You may disagree, but this is what the consensus of our committee was, like, for example, we wanna do new.
Right.
And really come down there, and then look at the other two. I don't, that's my own personal view, so I wanna throw that out to, how do you all feel about that? Or do you wanna say, you know, well, here are the advantages of new, my own druthers is that that's wishy-washy. And, you know, we've been weeding here since last summer.
My only
Yeah.
slight fear is parallel group doing similar stuff, like the Berkshire County Education Task Force. They put a stake in the
Oh, right.
ground and made everybody crazy.
Right,
They
that's
said, like,
true.
we're gonna have one giant
school district.
school district, and people freaked out about it.
Yeah.
And maybe because they went too far in saying that, a lot of interesting information got ignored. And if they had said, this is our 10-year goal and we're gonna do all this stuff to get there,
Mhm.
then they might have got more traction. So I don't have a predetermined conclusion on it, and it may really emerge 2-3 more meetings in, right? Like if every single person in this room says on April 9th, we really wanna do X, right? I'm not even gonna say what X is, cause I don't wanna bias the group, right? But if everybody says we wanna do X, then maybe there's strong
Okay.
consensus, and that's what we wanna do. But it might be possible that everybody's not gonna say that.
Okay.
Well, my perspective has been since we started that having a recommendation meant a recommendation, not a slate of recommendations, unless recommendation A and recommendation B are, here's the most costly one and here's the cheapest one, roll them both out there. But, you know, I think we're gonna spend all this time working on it, we should have something to say that's definitive.
Right, okay. Yeah.
But I think we should present the one that we feel most comfortable with.
Sure.
But I think you gotta tell them what the others are.
Sure.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
that's fine with that, you know,
because I'm sure that's gonna come up in the conversation. What else did you talk about?
I think
And
you
why
have to
didn't
be,
you- and why didn't you
Here's-
pick those?
We were more favorable to this, and here's why.
Yeah.
Okay.
And be a little more gentler with it than Bill's. you know.
I think you have to be very careful about how we do it. I mean, I agree with Bill. I think we should have, this is our recommendation. Because the last time these things got out there, then there was accusations made while information was withheld. So we gotta be very careful. I mean, the school committee obviously is gonna make the final decision on what they wanna present. And probably, you know, the numbers are gonna have a lot to do with that. But sat on that last committee, partially anyway, and listened to, well, we didn't do this, we didn't tell them about this, and then all hell broke loose, and you saw what the results were. So, but I agree with Bill. I think we need to come with a fairly strong, with a recommendation, number one, as long as we can be unified. I mean, if half of us want this and half of us want that, then we're already in have a problem then.
Yeah, the quagmire.
Okay.
Before I just want to get something, well, it happens to be fresh in my mind, because I have been following the stuff that they're doing up in Waconia, and the letters that are now starting to pour in, and this and that, and everything, but either Peter or Steve, why is it they're having, or they've had this big argument over geothermal, and the statement in the paper, if I believe it was correct, that the state would not entertain paying for that?
Yeah, that would be news to me. I mean, they were gonna reimburse. They actually give you more percentage off the bottom line if you have green aspects to your building.
Mhm.
So unless something has changed significantly, I'm not sure that was represented properly.
I came away with the same thing.
But when
from
we,
what I read.
when we did the buildings down there, and geothermals in the middle school, we weren't penalized by not having that part of the reimbursement. Is
No,
that
we-
correct?
No, is the opposite.
We did receive reimbursement. I don't know what the exact numbers were for the geothermal, but I do know the numbers for the photovoltaics.
Mhm.
Those cost $440,000 to put in, and once we got online and showed we were producing electricity, we received 390 of it back. So it was a 50,000, and we generate about $10,000 to $15,000 worth of electricity a year through those panels. So it was about a 3 to 4 year payback period for those.
Now, I know that's not the purview of this committee, but I just wanted to get that out there, because it might play into a recommendation that
It's hard to
Please,
believe,
Dr.
Paul. I read that too, and I said that something's
okay.
not right
The,
here.
the other thing to know, Paul, is and Steve's more of an expert in this, geothermal is not as simple as it looks.
No.
We had lots of meetings about geothermal. It was a major problem, citing the wells, and I couldn't even pretend to explain it, but it was pretty complicated.
Okay.
And it's essentially a whole separate plumbing system. I mean, you have your plumbing system for your water that goes to your sinks and toilets and gray water and stuff. And then it's a whole new system. And in the building we also have 2 traditional boilers. And the geothermal and the 2 boilers don't ever cross.
Hmm.
They're individual heating systems. So it's a big add-on.
There was an interesting thing, Steve and I have talked about this a lot. So our system at the middle school is an open
Open.
system, and sort of the preferred or more interesting one is a closed system, because things don't get clogged up, and it can run smooth. It's more expensive to put in, but it's easier to maintain and run. And we were just sort of talking about possibilities, and one would be, the traditional way to do geothermal is to drill down. But another thing you could do is you could cover like the existing field that's in front of Route 7 with pipes and have them go all around, and then put another, how many feet of soil on top of it? Like
5 or 6 feet.
5 or 6
fill
feet
over it.
of fill over it, and you could do it there. Have no expenses or limited expenses for drilling down, and run the system that way, which is sort of interesting.
I just wanted to get that out so I could be a little bit more up to date when I'm reading the nonsense like coming out of Waconia now.
Well, and I may call up there and talk to Lori, the superintendent, and sort of say, what's the reality of this versus how in that particular case it was reported.
Well, Justin, I find it interesting because I was not in on the original thing and I don't know the process, but like the article today talked about that MSBA will only reimburse them $300 per square foot, and yet the estimate is $480 per square foot?
I mean,
Is that?
I think that's one way of
Doing the percentage, yeah.
of doing the percentage, right?
Right, okay.
So like
Yeah.
when we were talking about our project, it was what, 48.3 or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could probably take that percentage and convert it into,
A square foot.
Right.
like, yeah, squared, like what, It's 1,000, I think this building was, the last project was 126,000 square feet or something.
Including the addition, yeah.
Including the addition, and you could back your way into that, but the more accurate thing, because the other thing is they're not, and maybe Sharon and John will talk to this, it's not that all of the square feet are the same cost, right? So, like the cost of a science lab is almost double the cost of a regular classroom, and corridors and gyms have different costs than either of those.
Paul, I think the other thing that you kind of have to think about, and I think Wacona's going through the same thing from what I've been hearing too, is that final number everybody fears. It's such a huge number. People don't look at what the actual number is after reimbursement. People look at that big, whatever their number is, $74 million or whatever it is. That they're not looking at the 36 million or whatever the reimbursement is or something like that, or that they're getting. They're getting less than that, isn't there? Well over 50%, aren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're under 50.
Yeah, so whatever, so, and I think, so that's where you start seeing a lot of misinformation is, I think that's what happened here too.
So I
Is
think
because-
well, this goes to marketing it,
Hmm.
what Rebecca was, I think, how do we, by law, you have to state that figure.
Yeah.
I remember, because I was the precinct warden on B, and I remember people saying, well, this isn't what it costs us, and my fallback was, being a warden, I couldn't say anything, I just said, that's the law. The law states that figure has to be there.
Yeah.
And it's up to the public to be understanding that that's not really the figure, and of course, all of us in the public eye, or the officials know that. But how do you translate that to the general public, or to the lady on Oak Street who has never voted before and sees 74 million?
Yeah.
And Dan is right there, because I agree, I think people look at that final number. So we have to educate them also that the final number is really not what you're voting on. You're only voting on the approval.
And this time, at least two things might be different, and maybe three, right? So there's a new regional agreement with a different percentage for capital assessments or allocations, so that could potentially have a huge impact, right? Essentially West Stockbridge stays the same, and Stockbridge pays more than they would have in the previous system, and Great Barrington pays less, assuming we get to a point where that's approved.
Yeah.
So that's one. The other one is, depending on the timing of this, we may be retiring the debt on the elementary and the middle school right around the time that this happens. And if we could line those up almost perfectly, that would be a great thing. And then, I think particularly in Great Barrington, where we had the biggest challenges, we have to get in conversation with the select board and the finance committee around what capital projects they have coming down the pipeline, so we both don't do multi-million-dollar projects in the same window. Right, and I know, like, the town has a lot of bridges that are having.
Well, we're at 8 million this year, so we should be good for hopefully a couple of years, right, Steve?
You have to pay $4 million for the bridge over Division Street.
Yeah. That's a big one.
It does need a little work.
Just-
$4 million for that little,
So
about
that's-
as long as it's stable.
That's something? In
The other thing that was kind of interesting, you gotta be very careful too about this, is that Doug McNally, who's well known throughout the county as an educator, superintendent, principal up in Pittsfield area, throughout what the state says, this number, but you gotta translate that into, that's for allowable costs, as opposed to costs that they don't allow to pay for. And I think I'm sure I got my numbers not exactly right, is that the reimbursement is 48%, but when you take out what they're going to pay for, it drops down to something like 43% of the allowable costs. So you have to be very careful about.
The guy wrote a letter, the co-chairman of the building commission today, the editor, answering McNally.
Did he-
And
today?
thanking, yeah, it's
I
in
didn't see
today's,
today's
and
paper.
it's, he thanks him for doing that, but then he clarifies it
Okay.
a little
I
more,
haven't read it
but
yet,
you're right.
so.
My other concern is, at least in Great Barrington, our history of overrides is not very good. And so this would be an override situation in all three towns, obviously.
2.5?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at that too. So there's another thing that we have to convince people, and that has to be written in such a way. Because actually, people, what did, in Great Barrington, people voted for the project and then didn't vote for the override.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well, and
Not-
Bill,
not
Bill, I wanna
enough.
make sure.
Not enough people
I wanna
are.
make sure I understand, so, but this committee is not gonna have any price tags that we're looking at. So we're basically we would make some sort of a recommendation or some combination saying, these are the things we think need to happen going forward, really dependent upon what the school committee sees when it takes its steps and looks at cost. So, I mean, I think right, because we're already talking about cost and all that sort of stuff, but we're not going to know any of that, because we will not have gone through someone coming and costing it out and saying new cost two something a square foot,
Right.
I
refer cost
think
one.
the way
Right.
that Sharon's gonna structure it will have a very rough, right? Very rough draft ballpark estimate of, like, this group has to know enough to be able to make a recommendation, but it's gonna be a range.
But if this group just ignored price,
right.
I would think 99% of you would say, well, let's just build a new building if we're not talking about price, because that'll be the best educational. But we know that you wanna pass the voters, and you have to think about price.
Right, but then, I mean, one of the things that, John Winokur will share is the assumption is that new is expensive, but if you do new and you use one of the model buildings, the reimbursement might be such that actually it's the same as a renovation and addition.
Cheaper heat and everything else.
So, I mean, I don't know, we'll let him, share some of that.
So I have one question. When we hear about financing and incentives, somewhere between our last meeting and tonight, Terry wrote an article and went back and talked to a few people who seemed to have something to say about voting in Great Barrington.
Mhm.
And they raised two issues. One was the reimbursement rate for
Oh, yeah, there's one other
out-of-town
thing.
students, and the other one, what was reimbursement rate in, what was the, it was all about school, it was choice and school size, you know, are you building a school, are you
Right.
renovating a school for the people you have to educate? And, you know, so, will your finance people touch on that? Cause I don't think that issue's gone away, and as long as we're, you know, out-of-town students aren't paying as much in as in-town students do.
Right.
Whatever number this school costs is gonna be an issue.
Yeah.
And if you say I'm building it for 500, and there's only, the projection is we're going down to 3-something, ignoring what's going on in Sheffield for a minute, then, you know, I think we have to know, this group needs to know what it is we're recommending the building, what
Right.
size building we're recommending.
Yeah. So I think at that point, we can come with, again, and I don't wanna sort of parcel this out too much, but if enrollment drives everything.
Sure.
Right? So if we build a school for 530 kids, or whatever it was the last time, 550, what was it?
50 something, 550 something.
550, then we get one thing. If we build a school for 400, we get something else.
Sure.
The other thing that's also in play is us in relation to other districts. So there are neighbors around us, right? So Southern Berkshire, Farmington River, which is Otis and Sandusfield, and Richmond. And then I guess by extension, Lee and Lennox. I imagine Lennox is gonna continue to do its own thing for a while because they can't.
Lennox.
Because it's Lennox,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's probably fair. Farmington River has tried once to have negotiations with Southern Berkshire around doing something with them, and nothing came out of that. At some point, they may reach out to us, or we may reach out to them, but that's been a more challenging relationship around finances. Southern Berkshire has been part of that South County group, and I think for the moment, they've been pretty clear that they'd like to continue to do their own thing. Right? I think if one reads the tea leaves, it's gonna be hard for them to do their own thing at the high school level in a few years. Right? And then the other one is Richmond, so I've spent the last 2.5 years being their superintendent, and the plan is that in next December, the school committees decide whether we continue to do that or not, and I think their challenge is around autonomy for their elementary school, but I think there's a possibility they might be interested in doing something with us at the high school level, and that maybe more than a possibility, right? There may
So
be
that
some-
would change the school choice question a little bit.
It would change that. It would also make us eligible for significant reimbursement for the capital project as part of an expanded district. So all my time supervising kindergarten and second grade teachers over there may end up having a $4 to $6 million payoff if we can pull that off.
Your hourly rate is terrific.
It would be great, but you don't know how many hours I've spent there.
Maybe not so much.
Yeah, no, I remember when
Sorry.
I talked to Sharon, with Michelle in October, it's in part of the notes, we get extra points for bringing in another regional district or a town.
Right.
They give you extra points, so.
So is that a factor for this group to consider, or is that when we toss to the school committee and say, okay, this is what we'd like the building to look like, and not
I
try to consider population?
Yeah, my recommendation would be, we don't, because we might muck up something that has to be negotiated school committee to school committee, and we'll know about that by December, because we agreed to figure out what we're doing with my role in relation to Hancock, New Ashford, and Richmond by December.
Yeah, no, I didn't imagine it would be resolved anytime soon, I know, way back was one thing, first things Paul talked about was school population.
Right.
Who are we trying to accommodate?
No, Steve, does that make sense in
That makes
relation to?
perfectly good sense.
Eileen, you're sort of out of my line of sight.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Would one of the options be a regional vocational technical, I don't wanna say school, program in a renovated or new building that would be open for tuition to the surrounding towns on an agreement process?
Yeah.
With the agreement almost in place before you went for reimbursement?
Yes.
So
I
that-
would
So,
think
so.
That
we-
would qualify as an enlarged program, I would think.
I think that would too, and there are two reasons why that's good. That, in and of itself, it's good, because vocational programs that kids identify as they're enrolling can actually charge a different tuition rate than non-vocational programs, right? We've not exercised that right, because kids get here and they don't often make a decision until they're in 10th or 11th grade, and they may not follow a coherent path, but that's one reason. The other thing is, and for several years, people would say, let's make Mount Everett a vocational school for South County, and let's make Monument a high school.
Academic.
Right, an academic. And one of the things that we've been arguing lately that I think is really important is to have an interplay between the academic and the vocational program. So there's not one that's a vocational school and one that's a academic school, but actually the academic kids could learn a whole lot in a vocational context, and the vocational kids could learn a whole lot in an academic context. And looking at the numbers in some of the other communities, I don't think we can sustain multiple high schools in South County indefinitely. So we need to figure out how to bring people together.
At one of the meetings of the Lee, Lennox, Southern Berkshire,
Mhm.
materials. There seemed to be real interest and enthusiasm from the other school people when the idea of a vocational program, an expanded vocational program, was mentioned.
Yeah,
And people leaned forward in their seats, and one person started to clap.
Yeah, that's, you'd like to have
I
that happen at
recall.
meetings.
So-
I like having it at meetings. Yeah, no, I think that's good. One of the things Diane said at a school committee meeting, it was sort of the Field of Dreams thing, like if you build it, they will come. And what's nice about this from a geographical standpoint, when they built Taconic had hopes that people would commute long distances to go to vocational programs at Taconic, and it doesn't appear that that has happened. They're drawing kids from Pittsfield and some of the very close surrounding communities, but they're not drawing anybody from South County, because in a car, it's 45 minutes door to door, and in a bus, it's longer than that. But that's not the case for kids from potentially Lee, Lennox, or Southern Berkshire, but us.
Just taking a quick step backwards, and I don't know, maybe it's just a foolish number, but would it be possible for either Sharon or Steve just to translate what this building cost in 1960 whatever to now? 68 to now. I mean, it's just putting in some sort of.
There's some like compound interest calculator, right?
But it'd be
Like
it'd be a
that.
neat little exercise to look at, just to see if we're gonna, that way if you're talking about comparing new and old, see what,
And even what the average taxpayer was responsible for. Maybe that's asking too much,
That
but I
might
mean,
be,
like, what
yeah.
was the payment? People had to pay for it at that point.
That's when you could get a good humor ice cream for a nickel.
Yes. But anyway, I don't know, it just might be a fun number just to
Not
look at,
quite,
just
Steve.
to.
Not quite, no, I'm just joking. A quarter?
Yeah.
Gas was way under $1 though.
Yeah.
The guy in the Eagle had something with a menu, didn't he? The guy that runs all the old memory things up there, he had something with an ice cream cone that was like 3 cents or 4 cents in 1970, 69, 70. So, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a neat idea.
I mean, it's on the books, right? We know what the costs were, because you can go up and see.
Well, there's something hanging in the conference room of the main office that has the little bit of a write-up, like what was handed out
Yeah.
the day we opened up.
Yeah.
I think it was like a $3 million building, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
What's the inflation on that?
It's probably like 15-20 million now.
Mm.
Yeah, that's interesting. In a sec, I'll type it in. Okay, other.
Yep.
Find anything here tonight, or
Huh?
are we gonna do this?
Does anybody have anything else? We charted our course, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has any things that you want to consider, just let us know, all right?
Just going back to the numbers, enrollment, I know one of our first meetings, we hashed that out pretty good. We spent a good half hour on that. I don't have my notes here with me, but I know that we kind of found out what the minimum amount, even without choice or tuition, was a fairly hard number, and that the difference between that and adding that wasn't a significant with regards to the actual building, if my memory serves.
I think that was was that John Winokur's presentation? While you're
We
over-
can-
No, it was in this room. It was,
No,
I think
We
it
went
was
through a bunch of projections.
Right, and we can go back and look at it.
Yeah.
The thing, like my takeaway from it, and I'll look at our notes, was we came up pretty much with the same number that both the MSBA and NESDEC came up with, which is the number in like the mid 500s. So I don't remember exactly
Yeah.
whether it's 540 or
Oh, the
550.
enrollment, right, yeah.
Yeah.
But we sort of did all these mental gymnastics to get back to the same number that.
Yeah, the only reason I brought it up tonight is because it appears
Yeah.
that you don't have to scratch the surface very hard to come up with that as an issue for whatever we plan
Right.
to do.
Does anybody else have anything else they wanna do or consider? Our course is set for the next few meetings, I guess. All right.
And I think what I'll try to do is I may, as we plan the next meeting, the 2 ones after that, I may actually have people like do some homework, not terrible homework, but fun homework, a little project, and you could get your parents to help you out. But just so people have an opportunity to, like, maybe 10 minutes of gathering your thoughts, so then we have a structured conversation, and we don't meander too much, but we're on the same page through some questions, if people are okay with that.
Yeah.
And gold stars for people who do it, and whatever for people who don't.
If we have a snow day, do we get an extra 5 days?
Yeah. No, we're gonna have the blizzard bag.
But I would like feedback on it. Some people are really excited about it, and some people curse me every time I make that phone call at 5 in the morning.
I'm glad it's you and not me.
I'm working really hard also on my tone, because some people think I sound grumpy at 5 in the morning. So I'm trying to push back against the grumpiness.
I'm like the last one.
At 5 in the morning.
Okay. Anybody have anything else? Okay. Yeah, those are the projections.
Yeah, so maybe what else I'll do, and this is a good question, Diane just asked me, is there a place where all the meeting notes are kept? Doreen is the keeper of the meeting notes, but I'll aggregate them all and send them to everybody, so people can reflect on the notes, which I think will be really valuable. Particularly because some of the, like, the time the farmers came and Steve Boyd came, that was a really interesting meeting, and I can't imagine the notes capture that meeting, but
I
that
sent them
would-
to you, Dan.
that would be
Yeah,
good.
we have Phil.
Okay.
Yeah, there's video on YouTube of
And
it.
there's video.
Well, no, I was at that when you sent me the last meeting.
Oh,
No,
the
that's
teachers.
interesting.
What is that
video
We
time?
should, and we've not
Yeah.
been doing it.
You know?
Maybe what I'll
Is
do
that
is I'll
under the
send
brochure?
out all the minutes as draft
YouTube,
minutes.
it's channel?
Embedded.
And then at the next
That's what we can
meeting,
vote on.
It's embedded
after people
in,
review them, just to review them, we could also
one of the
vote.
stories that I did
Right,
on
yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Good.
Nice suggestion.
Okay.
I can shoot you
All right.
the, I can shoot you the link
Yeah,
if you
great.
want.
Can I just
You
write
have
my
a-
email on this?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah, sure, that'd be good.
This is the projection for Sunday.
Signing up?
Let's say